You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. Before we jump in, a quick apology. Since I'm an AI-generated voice, I sometimes pronounce Hebrew like a GPS giving directions in a foreign country. So if you hear me say Nahum instead of Nachum, just smile, shake your head, and pretend I'm your cousin who only shows up at Passover once a year and butchers the prayers. Today's topic is Nachum. Yes, Nachum, one of the so-called minor prophets. Minor doesn't mean he's unimportant. It just means his book is short. Think of it like a fun-sized candy bar. You can finish it quickly, but it still packs a punch. Nahum is only 3 chapters long, but those chapters are filled with fire, fury, and some pretty bold poetry aimed at one of Israel's biggest enemies. If the prophets were a Netflix series, Nahum's season would be short, but explosive, like a 3-episode mini-series where everything gets blown up in the finale. So, who exactly was Nachum? His name means comfort or consolation, which is kind of ironic when you realize most of his book is about destruction. Scholars believe he lived sometime in the 7th century BCE, and he focuses on the mighty Assyrian Empire, specifically their capital city, Nineveh. Yes, the same Nineveh that Jonah reluctantly preached to a century earlier. Remember Jonah, the guy who got swallowed by a fish, spit back out, and basically saved the Ninevites for a while? Well, by Nahum's time, the Ninevites had gone back to their wicked ways, and God was no longer in the mood for mercy. If Jonah is the story of God's patience, Nahum is the sequel called God Strikes Back. It's like comparing The Empire Strikes Back to A New Hope. The tone shifts from second chances to serious judgment. Nahum becomes the prophet cheering on Nineveh's downfall, which, honestly, sounds like something out of an ancient breaking news headline. Nachum's central theme is crystal clear. God is just, and arrogant empires eventually fall. The Assyrians were brutal conquerors. Think of them as the bullies of the ancient Near East. They were infamous for harsh tactics like deporting entire populations and inventing creative torture methods that make today's horror movies look tame. Israel and Judah had both suffered under their power. So when Nachum starts announcing Nineveh's destruction, it isn't just random prophecy. It's a message of hope for the oppressed. Imagine if your favorite sports team, after years of being crushed by a hated rival, finally gets the win of the century. That's the vibe of Nachum's prophecy. It's part trash talk, part victory parade, and part reminder that, in the end, no empire lasts forever. Even the ones that seem unstoppable eventually crumble. Rome fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, and in Nachum's world, Assyria was about to get its turn on the losing side of history. Now let's talk about the poetry. Nachum's book isn't long, but the language is powerful, filled with vivid images. He describes God as a whirlwind and storm, mountains quaking and seas drying up. It's almost cinematic, like something you'd see in a Marvel movie trailer with dramatic special effects. Picture thunderclouds rolling in, dramatic orchestral music, and then Nachum shouting, "God's wrath is coming." The verses against Nineveh are particularly colorful. He talks about chariots racing madly through the streets, shields flashing red, and piles of corpses so big people trip over them. It's brutal, but remember, this is prophecy, not bedtime stories. Nachum's poetry is meant to shock, to stir emotions, to make oppressed people feel like justice is finally on the horizon. Think of it as the ancient version of a viral diss track, where every line takes aim at the enemy and reminds listeners that karma is real and divine payback is on its way. Interestingly, Nahum is sometimes overlooked in Jewish study because it's so laser-focused on one event, Nineveh's downfall. There aren't many broad moral lessons or heartwarming stories here. It's not like Isaiah with soaring visions of peace, or Micah with the famous, "Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God." Nahum's message is basically, hey everyone, the bad guys are toast. Yet, there's something important in that. It shows that even in the Hebrew Bible, there's room for different kinds of prophecy. Sometimes the message is spiritual guidance, sometimes it's rebuke, and sometimes it's reassurance that enemies won't win forever. Nachum reminds us that cheering for justice is part of the human story. It's like when a villain in a movie finally gets caught and the audience claps. Nachum is that applause. He doesn't sugarcoat it, and maybe that's why his book is short. You can only do so much poetic trash talk before you've made your point.
Hey guys, finding the perfect gift for the food lover in your life is easy, thanks to Goldbelly. Goldbelly ships America's most iconic foods, straight from world-famous restaurants right to your door. So if you want to treat someone to Joe's Stone Crab from Miami, Franklin Barbecue from Texas, or desserts from famous foodies like Ina Garten or Martha Stewart, Goldbelly has you covered. Just go to goldbelly.com and for a limited time, get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT. That's promo code GIFT.
Historically, Nachum was right. Around 612 BCE, Nineveh fell to a coalition of Babylonians and Medes. Archaeologists have found evidence of its destruction, and ancient records describe the city's fiery end. Imagine the headlines: breaking, Nineveh falls, Assyrian Empire over. For Israel and Judah, this was huge. The unstoppable giant had collapsed. Of course, Babylon would rise next, and Judah would face new challenges. But for a brief moment, Nachum's prophecy came true, and the people could breathe easier. It's a reminder of how fluid history is. Superpowers rise, but they also fall. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, they all had their day. Nachum's book fits into that cycle, saying, "Don't be too impressed by today's empire. God's justice has the final word." It's both comforting and sobering. Comforting if you're the underdog, sobering if you're the one in power thinking you'll last forever. Spoiler alert, you won't. Now you might wonder, how does this short book matter to us today? We don't exactly walk around worried about the Assyrians anymore, but Nahum's message still resonates. On a personal level, it's about remembering that bullies, whether individuals or institutions, don't have the last word. On a cultural level, it reminds us that no empire, corporation, or celebrity dynasty is invincible. Even the biggest names eventually fade. Think about blockbuster tech companies. Some that once ruled the world are now punchlines. MySpace, anyone? Nahum's book is like the spiritual version of those cautionary tales. It says, don't get dazzled by power that looks permanent. It isn't. And for those on the margins, those who feel crushed by systems bigger than themselves, Nachum's words still offer comfort. Maybe not soft, cuddly comfort, but the gritty, satisfying kind where you know justice eventually shows up, even if it takes longer than you'd like. One of the interesting debates among scholars is whether Nachum's tone is too gleeful about Nineveh's destruction. Some critics say it feels like overkill, like celebrating too much when your rival loses. Imagine fans storming the field after a game, burning the other team's jerseys, and posting endless memes. That's kind of the energy here. But others argue that when you've been on the receiving end of oppression for generations, celebrating your oppressor's downfall is natural. It's cathartic. In Jewish tradition, there's always been a balance between acknowledging justice and tempering our joy. For example, on Passover, when we celebrate the Exodus, we spill drops of wine during the Seder to remember the Egyptians who suffered. Nachum doesn't include that balance. He's the raw, unfiltered voice of people who finally see their enemy destroyed. Maybe that's why his book sits alongside the others. It adds an honest, emotional layer to the tapestry of prophecy. In Jewish liturgy and study, Nachum doesn't play a starring role. You won't find his words quoted on posters or embroidered on pillows. He's not Isaiah or Psalms, but he does appear in the Haftarah readings, those prophetic passages read after the Torah portion in synagogue. Specifically, part of Nachum is read on the fast day of Tisha B'Av in some traditions, a day that commemorates destruction and exile. His words about cities falling fit right in with the themes of that somber day. Outside of that, Nahum is more like a deep-cut track on an album that only dedicated fans know well. But that's part of the beauty of the Hebrew Bible. It's not just greatest hits. It includes voices like Nachum's, reminding us that sometimes the most human reaction to oppression is to shout with joy when justice finally comes. Even if it makes us a little uncomfortable, that voice matters because it's real and raw. So to wrap this up, Nachum may not be the prophet you've heard the most about, but he plays an important role. His short, fiery book gives us a snapshot of a moment when a superpower collapsed and the oppressed finally got to celebrate. It's loud, poetic, and unapologetic, like the mic drop at the end of a concert. Nahum shows us that the Bible isn't just about gentle lessons or quiet wisdom. It's also about honest emotion, relief, and sometimes even joy when the bad guys lose. So next time you hear the name Nachum, Think of him as the prophet who brought the victory playlist, blasting the ancient equivalent of "We are the champions." And with that, we've reached the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening to Everything Jewish, 10 minutes at a time. If you enjoyed this episode, forward it to a friend who might like it too. Or leave a positive review so others can find this podcast. Until next time, keep learning, keep laughing, and keep celebrating justice.